Joining us in this conversation is John Lunn, CEO and founder of Gravy, an orchestration provider focused on merchant empowerment. John, welcome to Payments on Fire. Thanks for joining us on this episode.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful that we're getting back together. This topic it's got a lot of angles and dimensions to it. The one that I really wanted to pick up on as we kick this conversation off, I recalled that when we were preparing for this episode, you commented that every merchant has an orchestration platform. They just don't call it that. What a great observation. How did you arrive at that insight in your career and in your journey towards where you are today, founding Gravy?
Yeah, so I've been doing payments since the dawn of mankind, it feels like. So since 1997, I've been in online payments, firstly with CyberSource and then with PayPal. And I this was just by talking to merchants, and I think it's born out of slight frustration from my part. I was busy trying to get merchants to adopt, PayPal and Venmo and all the other types of payments out there, and hitting roadblocks and, roadmaps and all that kind of stuff. And really just sat down and started asking questions like, why is this so hard? It really doesn't need to be. Why are people finding it so difficult? And I think it's that. And what struck me is the problem is that everybody's doing this independently. So they don't call it an orchestration team, but if you think back when you first start, it's one person does an integration to, a Stripe or a Braintree or one of those. And then as 6 months later, they're adding PayPal, and then they're adding maybe a buy now, pay later provider, and then they're going international. And everyone is doing that or was doing that by just adding more people to that team. And that's a very, very large merchants with the 300 people in their payments teams. And this struck me of one thing, they're all building the same thing. It's basically an orchestration platform. And they're all building it independently, and they're all building it with custom code. And I was like, surely we can do that. We can build a tool that helps them get that done quickly without needing to build it in-house and in custom fashion.
John, you bring up a really good point about everyone doing some of these activities. And as we had been researching this area and trying to crystallize a definition of payments orchestration for ourselves, this is something we kept stumbling upon and coming into. We found ourselves differentiating between, on the one hand, the activities of orchestrating payments, optimizing transactions, switching between payment methods, coordinating between providers, and then the integrated abilities of what we've been referring to as capital O orchestration, the orchestration platform that brings it all together and calls it by the name orchestration.
Yeah, and I think, look, over the last couple of years since ourselves and others have launched in the space, I think a lot of people have decided they're orchestrators, which they aren't in the traditional fashion. I think that sort of confused people across the business. I think we're starting to zoom in on pure play payment orchestration or orchestration as a tool. I think under that sits a lot of other things like optimization is part of orchestration, but it really, for me or for us, or an orchestrator or an orchestration platform, which is what we call it, is a tool that empowers merchants to do this for themselves rather than someone who does it for them. And that's kind of our view of what an orchestrator should be.
Yeah, I think we share a similar view that there are so many players in the payments ecosystem, merchants, PSPs, gateways, that are doing some element of orchestration. But the difference is it's the orchestration platforms that are bringing all of this together in one place for the merchant.
Yeah, and the important bit there is for the merchant, right? And we talk about empowerment a lot at Gravy, and we want to empower merchants to achieve the things they need to get done. I think throughout payments, the merchant is usually the last in the food chain, as it were. So, there's a whole load of people taking bites of the cake as we go along. But the merchant's the one who ultimately is paying for this, right? And should be the one who can make the decisions. So we talk about empowering merchants to act on their payment strategy and do it in real time without being held back by the capabilities of providers or, needing custom engineering, custom code to make this happen. And we believe the merchant should be the one making the choices and not being given a limited menu, as it were.
Why do you think that now, at this point in time in the industry, merchant empowerment is starting to become in vogue? As you mentioned, the merchants have been on the bottom of the totem pole for ages. I think since the beginning of all of this, which is interesting. What's changing that's bringing this to the forefront and making orchestration so popular?
I think a part of it is a lot of the myths have been broken, but I think also there's just a hell of a lot going on in payments right now, and there always has been. But it's getting to a point where a lot of those bells and whistles, you can't necessarily depend on one or a few providers to give you everything that you deserve as a merchant. I mean, a good example of this is like network tokenization, right? It's been around, people's prices have been put up, but a very small amount of merchants have actually embraced it at the core because of the difficulties around rolling it out as a merchant without help from an orchestration platform or directly through a PSP. So I think that's part of it, is that we look at the list of things coming through to merchants this year alone. You've got things like Click to Pay. You've got the new version of 3D Secure. You've got perhaps delegated auth starting to be launched. All of these have a definite merchant benefit, perhaps won't be rolled out as quickly as can benefit a merchant right now. So I think what's happened is the merchants have said, hang on a second, why am I not driving? And I think that has also been driven by the choices out there, the cheaper prices that are perhaps being offered by a number of different PSPs trying to take chunks of the market. And it feels like a little bit of a buyer's market for merchants right now. If you've got the capacity to move quickly, then you can get a really good deal on payments. So that's driving orchestration heavily at the minute. And of course, the global downturn, whatever we want to call it, recession or not, is definitely also driving people to look at efficiencies, whether that's efficiencies on the providers they pick or efficiencies around the teams that are doing the work. It is definitely driving people to look not only at cost cutting, but also at cost saving.
Yeah, I think in some of the research that we've been doing, many of those kind of factors and dynamics would resonate. So that kind of increasing complexity, whether it is the tokenization and sort of scheme activity, whether it is regulatory activity, the range of alternative payment methods that are kind of coming on stream that merchants are increasingly aware that they need to make available for their end customers. And then that second group around the need for, or at least the kind of the pressure for increased efficiency. So I think that current like macroeconomic climate and the sort of drive for ever increasing efficiency is definitely causing some merchants and some merchants of scale to say, well, actually, is there a better way of doing this? And is an orchestration platform actually the better way of doing it? Because it can enable things that I might have done in-house, but it can enable me to potentially do it in a more efficient way, like now and going forwards.
I would say the RFPs, RFIs that you're getting last year, people were out looking for a new PSP, for example, but now what we're seeing is they're coming in two phases. Most of them are coming as like, we need a new PSP and also would like to look at an orchestrator. So now, for us, a relatively new business, we're seeing those come through at a huge cadence there were before. I think there's been a merchant acceptance that this is something you should definitely look at. It's becoming mainstream. The more bigger and bigger clients start coming in, more big brand names start signing up to orchestration. It's a bit like Twilio, like in payments, right? In telephony a few years ago, you built horrific connections into voice systems, and then along comes a company like Twilio that gives you a nice simple API. And why would you do it the old way? I think that's really starting to become the realization now.
Yeah. And do you see with those RFIs and RFPs sort of I feel like building up the scale of merchants that are interested? Like, so maybe from historically being perhaps more in sort of mid-market, low end of enterprise merchants and kind of now moving up that spectrum?
Yeah, we're seeing the big brand names now asking about orchestration. So I think we had our first year of being in business, it was really tire kicking or people wanting to understand what orchestration was. Now people know they need orchestration, and they are the bigger brand names that you would recognize. Makes
sense. So we've touched on the what and the why. Can we dig a little bit into the how here? What is it, and how is orchestration dealing with things at sort of that nuts and bolts level of transaction processing and helping dev teams, arguably, in these organizations? You mentioned the 200 to 300 person payments groups. I lived that dream a few times in my past as well. And they're definitely huge organizations out there. And a lot of times they're with retailers or enterprises saying, why do we need 300 developers in our engineering team focusing on payments? That's not our core business. We're just trying to get paid, simply. So what is it that's allowing the dev teams to sort of get freed up? Is it removal of technical debt?
I mean, a number of different things. I mean, architectural debt is one of them. And that's like when I started Gravy, it was one of the biggest impacts we were seeing in payment teams is like, the butterfly flaps its wings in China and takes down payments in Uzbekistan. Like it literally to a point where these in-house custom built solutions, as they basically just evolved through time, they you end up with spaghetti code, and it's pretty common in engineering to end up with trying to pull one string and see where it ends up. And I think people were discovering that honestly, this was slowing the business down if everything you do is custom. And frankly, a lot of engineers, and one of the funny stories is one of our clients on computer gaming side as well, so games rather than gaming, when they implemented Gravy, a number of their engineers wrote us a thank you email saying, we joined this company to write computer games, not do payment systems. Thank you so much. Right? I think that's part of it.
You should start a wall, John. You should start a wall of thank you letters from tech teams. That's great.
But it is also part of it. And like, if you're a developer, and I'm a former developer, so I guess I'm a recovering developer, you should call it. You're very used to using tools to make your code go quicker. You're very used to using third-party libraries, SDKs, APIs, and it's very common for you not to rewrite everything from scratch. So with Gravy, the way that we're architected and build, that's the tools we give these development teams. They can do a lot of the stuff they would have had to build from scratch and move quicker, and frankly, not need to deal with all the upgrades and changes that happen. And what a lot of people forget is you can't grab a dev, get them to write a connection to a PSP, and then send them off to do something else, because there's a good chance a month later there'll be a change or something additional, and it goes on. And more connectors you add to it, the more that ends up you constantly maintaining, upgrading, and keeping things running. And it's not a simple case of do it once and hope, because especially at the moment, it's pretty much every couple of months something new comes in that you need to implement.
Yeah. I don't think that people, when they start down the path of, we just need to implement, pick a company, any which one, in order to accept cards or alternative payment methods or whatever, I don't think they really understand that down the road, what that's going to turn into. And the plethora of reason codes and formats out there for this stuff.
Every API is different. Every API does it in a different way. And it's, part of our goal here is simplifying it, but also trying to put a standard layer. If you're going to do network tokens, it should work in a certain way. It shouldn't work differently from Discover than it does from Amex and Visa. And that shouldn't be a complexity a merchant has to deal with.
Right. Absolutely.
John, you've described so many benefits for merchants, and we agree we're of the same perspective. They use to the fullest. There's such a wide range of areas that orchestration can improve merchants' lives, economics. From your perspective, though, out in the field, anecdotally, where do you think that merchants are actually deriving the most value, deriving the most return on investment? Is it the cost benefits internally? Is it optimizing processing costs, revenue uplift of improved auth rate performance? Is it being able to enter new markets more easily? What are you seeing in practice?
So we have all of those. And before we even, give a merchant a price, we'll sit down and we'll do an ROI analysis to show them where cost cuttings can come from, but also where cost savings can come from. We'll do all of that. But honestly, when I sit down and, we have very happy customers and I sit down and talk to them about what they love is the freedom to get stuff done. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but most people in payments teams have spent many years frustrated that they can't get anything done. And they've probably got an list with 30 or 40 things to get that done, that have been there for, 8 years, because every time they try and do something that is nice to have, they get something need to have, they get put in front of it. So I think when we talk to our merchants, we sit down, it's about speed to market, whether it's a new market, whether it's a new payment type, whether making changes to their business models or how they're accepting payments, giving people the freedom to do that and test it and try it without, years of engineering resource is what makes, head of payments most happy.
What about leadership? We've talked a lot about what makes engineers happy, but when you're pitching this to payments ops people or CFOs, leadership, What's the problem they think they need to solve? Again, is it that minimizing CapEx spend to invest in a new region or a new channel? Is it OpEx savings? Is it revenue growth?
Yeah, so for the CFO, I mean, we generally are selling to one of two personas in a business. A CFO, very much everything you just mentioned, is really bottom line, top line, where there's savings, etc. Also wanting, one of the most common places a merchant engage with us is when they're reconsidering their acquiring contract or their PSP contract. At that point, they're like, I need to shop around. And that's a lot of the time the CFOs, look, I want to move from here to here, but I can't do it because of all this other stuff. And it's a great place for us to come in. When we're selling into Payments Manager, it is basically, I have a list of things to get done. I can't get them done, or, I've just laid off 20% of my team. I can't get even the stuff I had done before. And it's really that conversation is, look, give us your list of 30, 24 of those you put in gravy will be done for you. So look at the other 6. And it is that. It's really an economic way to get a list of things that have to be done. And some of these things are needing to be done for regulatory reasons, or some pressure's coming, or the price has been put up that they haven't done it. And that's not a nice to have. That's like, you have to do it. And if you haven't got the engineers to do it, or even the in-house knowledge to know what you need to be done, then you're going to end up in trouble.
So there's a lot of emphasis, obviously, on removing complexity, driving operational efficiency, and it's largely around card processing activities, card transactions. Do you see orchestration empowering merchants in other ways beyond cards per se?
I mean, cards are the biggest. Still 97% of transactions going through cards, but absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest things we hear that people love about, our platform in particular is the ability to A/B test stuff. So you don't know if you need something, but being able to put some of your transactions through one flow and other transactions through another flow, whether that's enabling particular payment types, particular types of businesses, is hugely valuable. So with our platform, for example, you can send through any set of metadata and customize the checkout for that consumer, plus customize how it flows in the background. And so say you're doing holiday rentals, and the difference between what payment preference you would kind of push a consumer towards, it's really based on risk, right? So if it's a month out, then maybe you do want to use debit cards or open banking or perhaps a cheaper, slower platform because there's a lower risk. Whereas if the rental is for tomorrow, perhaps you do want to preference credit cards or something with fraud protection. So I think having that choice, the ability to, try different things, see what works from a consumer perspective, but also works from a flow perspective, is hugely valuable. Because if it is an 8-month investment to do an experiment, that you're going to do a lot less experiments. If it's a 10-minute configuration, some rules and setting out A/B tests, then you're much more able to experiment and benefit from a lot of the changes that are out there.
Yeah.
So that's a big part. Tokens, of course, tokenization. A lot of people find out if we ignore network tokens for now and just stick to standard tokenization, a lot of merchants find out way too late that they've sold their souls, as it were, to a particular provider, and now they're stuck. And we've seen over and over again, when a merchant moves from PSP-A to PSP-B, that migration of PSP-A's tokens to PSP-B tokens, you lose 60% of your customers never click on the renew button. They never come back. They don't do their subscription. And that's hugely important. And, we've seen some very, very large companies where the token provider's gone down, for example, and they're offline. They can't do anything about it. So being able to own your own tokenization setup and having it be agnostic is really, really valuable. Just call it just an insurance policy, right? just
right.
But having something that's big agnostic is very, very valuable to merchants. Network tokenization, I could talk about this all day. In fact, we have merchants having amazing auth rates with the use of network tokens, but they've had to learn over time about what works and what doesn't work, and some of the delays you get. When you first issue that network token for a first transaction, it's painful, right? But
yes.
If you get it right, you're getting auth rates in 10 basis points higher than everyone else. So it's valuable, but hard. And so a platform that allows you to try it, see what works for you in which market, really important. Because you make a decision based on the paperwork. you're not going to get it right. When you make a decision based on your own data and your own environments, you can actually get some huge benefits.
And there's just tremendous, as you're indicating, tremendous unevenness, not only in the how each network is implemented and the rules around it, around use and implementation and everything else, but the fact that not all of them have. Here in the US, we see that. And not all countries have it sort of nailed down with the issuers. So,
and some have it with some of the issues and not some of the other issues. So,
yeah, exactly.
Unless you've got an orchestration platform, how are you going to work that out? I mean, you're just going to have to hope. And I think what we built, I mean, a good example of this is what we're doing with debit cards, for example. So all the furore around debit cards and network tokenization, like what do you do with a co-branded debit? That's hard to do, right? You have to identify it's a co-branded debit. Two, you then have to route it directly to a debit network without using a network token, which means you need a proper vault. Then if it doesn't work for some reason, you need to pull it back, get the Visa, MasterCard token, and then send it through that network. Like, that's not something that a non-payment developer or someone with a team of payment experts could work out and get right. And I think an orchestration platform allows you to do that. Absolutely.
Anything else that comes to mind that you've observed in terms of benefits?
Data, where data is becoming more and more common. And I think, maybe it's a sad state of the world, but really data localization or residency is becoming much more important in payments. So, India is probably the classic example here where, payment data is not supposed to leave India if it's for an Indian payment. Having a platform that allows you to keep your data resident, the local regulations, or a platform that allows you to be flexible around that is getting more and more important. So, China, India, Indonesia, we're starting to see the Australian data protection laws. We're strong in Australia. It's important.
Yeah.
Europe. And other countries are following suit. So I think being able to still process payments in market without getting into problems with the regulator, but to keeping the speed up, transparency is all a part of it. And like we're 4 times faster than a lot of PSPs because in somewhere like Australia, because we can put the servers in the same data center as our merchant and data sets close to where they are. It's what they were calling edge a few years ago, but is actually going much more important in payments.
That's a great point, a great call out, and not something that people always talk about first when they're talking about orchestration,
Yeah.
They usually gravitate towards network tokens for some reason, but yeah, that's all good points.
I think it's just generally, it's infrastructure outside of orchestration. It's why we call ourselves a platform, not an orchestrator.
So John, just coming back to one of the benefits you mentioned there around tokenization and that ability to be processor agnostic or kind of PSP agnostic. So kind of clear benefit there of, removing tie-ins and complexity of switching processor. And I guess kind of similarly, that multi-acquire or multi-PSP setup gives you a kind of failover processing piece and kind of adds to your resiliency as a merchant and some redundancy. The however, though, or maybe sort of the question, and being a little bit devil's advocate for a moment, we do hear from some merchants that if you integrate with integrating with a single orchestration platform might create a sort of equivalent, albeit maybe in a slightly different part in the payment processing chain, but a kind of that singular point of failure, isn't it? It's a kind of single provider. So does that create a bit of a barrier for adoption for some kind of merchants as they're looking at that?
Before we launched, we talked to a lot of large retailers and said, look, we build this as a SaaS, essentially. Software as a sale, would you use it? And the larger they were, the louder they screamed no, for exactly that reason. It's like, no way will we introduce a single point failure into our payment system. The way we've architected Gravy is we're a cloud platform. So we look much more like an AWS or a Google Cloud. So we spin up instances of Gravy for our clients wherever they need them. And that can be one or many instances. So there's not one Gravy, there's thousands of Gravies. So our merchants will implement an instance of Gravy as redundant as they are. So the America East, America West, that's where the instances of Gravy sit. And that means if that instance of Gravy goes down, the one in the other part of America won't go down. Good example of this, that British accent, so you probably remember a couple of years ago, we had a heat wave in London and it took out the Google. I don't know if you remember, Google went down for a day.
I do remember that.
We remember any of our clients who had Google instances, we moved them within 3 minutes to a different part of the world and they're up and running again. And that's how we've designed the platform. There is no single point of failure with Gravy because every merchant has their own single tenancy instances. We can do multi-regional instances and we can scale horizontally and vertically. And it was directly to address that problem. And I'm very glad we did it because it means we can work with a larger merchant than it would be in a SaaS, and we're going to be restricted to, I think, smaller merchants.
So payments is a two-sided system, right? Just like we always talk about. In this case, it's not point blank obvious to the consumer or a business on the other side sitting in there and sort of working with a merchant that has put orchestration in place. It's under the hood. But does it show up in terms of consumer benefits? I mean, if someone's looking at the customer journey here and putting the customer first, are there clear benefits that you've seen come out of this when people have implemented it, for their customer?
The first thing is, of course, choice, right? So it's there's stats all over the place, and I'm a former PayPal, so it's sort of drilled into me from birth, as it were, but there's real, like, if you have the payment options that your consumer wants, they're much more likely to check out. I think there's also the removal of friction, which is very important. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the reasons we implemented our own 3D Secure service was because we realized that if you used the PSP's 3D Secure service, what could happen is a consumer would go through 3D Secure and then for some reason the payment would fail. Then if you had a backup PSP in that model, the poor consumer would have to do 3D Secure a second time, and you'd lose X amount of people per page and all the rest of it. So we implemented 3D Secure ourselves so that we could do it independently of the PSP, so the consumer would have a better experience. I think another one of these is like what we've done with MasterCard in Australia with Click to Pay, like going straight to the source, going directly into MasterCard and allowing consumers to have that sort of one-click checkout without it needing to be supported necessarily by the PSPs, and a consumer essentially being able to use Click to Pay irrespective of how that payment's going to run. So that's kind of core to us. We want to, ultimately the merchants are trying to get that checkout conversion, and that's really important. So having choice, having lower declines, and also causing as least pain as possible to the consumer is really important. And I think an orchestration can help with that, but also being able to customize checkout for that consumer, for that product at that time, which is part of our service, also makes it different. You don't want to present a consumer 1,000 different checkout options if they've only ever used 2 for the last 2 years, right? Make sure those are up in front, and maybe you do want to offer them something else, but really tailor it for the consumer. Often I've seen merchants with a uni checkout or whatever you want to call it, offering buy now, pay later for a $4 item. And like, why would you do that? But it's on the thing, it's taking real estate, it's distracting the consumer. So make it simple.
I think that's so interesting, John, because we tend to, in payments world, think of cart abandonment and checkout flows as this is a marketing, this is an acquisition, growth, checkout product. This is their problem, right? So presenting the right payment methods is part of that. And then we think of our problem is auth rates and insult rates, which is a technical term for a customer wants to give you their money and you're going to be disappointed when they can, and they're going to be disappointed when they can't. And it's been interesting recently to hear even risk platforms start to talk about we're improving auth rates, we're minimizing false declines, as opposed to we're blocking all of your fraud. I think we're all becoming so aware that, of course, there's going to be good reasons for declining payments and stopping genuine fraudsters, but you really don't want to interrupt that customer journey and create a bad experience, lose that sale, probably lose that customer. And chipping away at this is really the problem that when we talk about payment optimization and performance optimization, this is concretely what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot in there, right? There's an argument that if a customer has shopped with you consistently for the last 5 months with no problems, why are you even putting them through an anti-fraud product? Why are you even putting them through 3D Secure? Like, so, I when I used to sit with clients and doing payments, they say, "Oh, I want to reduce fraud to zero." I'm like, absolutely, I can reduce the fraud to zero. Just switch off your payments. No fraud. But it is always going to be a balance between, consumer experience and, risk. And I think that's unfortunately how we've ended up with higher interchanges for online payments than we should perhaps have. But I also think consumers are getting increasingly more keen on frictionless experiences, and the likes of PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay push people that way. I think as soon as you start introducing friction, people will give up and just go and shop on one of the big marketplace sites. So it's really important to have a smooth checkout flow.
So one of the games we play in our workshops is, what do they think? And, we've done this a little bit here already. We've talked about the merchants, we've talked about the consumers, but we like to walk around the block of all the different stakeholder groups and discuss what they might think of something. So, when you think about the networks, their processors at the banks, the banks themselves, the regulators, what are you hearing when you're out there talking about orchestration with those constituents? Are they happy about this? Are they sad about this development? Is it a threat? Is it an existential threat? Is it a new long lost friend or a newfound friend, or what is it?
So from a networks side, we have a very strong relationship with MasterCard, as you've probably seen. Their MasterCard very early on realized, hey, this might be a way to get our products to market quickly is go through an orchestrator, right? So we can get an orchestrator that's connected to all the PSPs, then maybe we roll out the product with the orchestrator. That will get it to consumers quicker than if we go by the PSPs. And that's what we've done with Click to Pay in Australia, New Zealand, and now spreading out through Asia. Because we're doing that all independent of the PSP and we do network tokens, we can essentially help MasterCard get quicker to market. And I think that is followed up with some of the other card schemes now going, hang on a second, this is another way of getting our products to market and perhaps having a better consumer experience. From a processor PSP perspective, interesting, of course, when we launched, the general comment was, why does anyone need orchestration? You get everything you need from us. But as it's become more commonplace, and the conversation I've had with most of them, if not all of the senior leaders, is like, look, we're just doing exactly what your customers are already doing today. We're just doing it in a more efficient way. So yes, is it easier for your customers to leave you? Maybe, but it's also easier for you to win your competitors' customers over. So we now have partnerships with everybody that we work with, like official partnerships. We're very independent. We don't take referral bonuses from anyone. So we've come out straight to market. We're saying, I'm from Switzerland, and we talk about being the Switzerland of payments here. Like, even when offered by a payment processor or a PSP, rev share or anything like that, we've said no. We'd rather you just give a better price to our merchants, because I think it's important for an orchestrator to sit in that place. So that's part of it. And then now, and interestingly now, we've got a number of banks or processors that are starting to use the Gravy suite in white label fashion to get their products to their merchants. And we've got a couple of PSPs are now going to be using the Gravy tools themselves to get their products to market. Someone like Wave in Australia, which are open banking provider, their API that their merchants implemented is our API co-branded with Wave. So I think the whole ecosystem has realized this might be a more efficient way to do things. And we don't sell only direct to merchants. We white label to shopping carts, payment processors, banks, and PSPs themselves.
Yeah, I think that's sort of broadening of parties that are using orchestration platforms to include PSPs or kind of traditional bank acquirers is something that we've sort of witnessed as well in various conversations. And it almost kind of feels like we might see a blurring between what was a very kind of clear traditional PSP role and a very clear kind of orchestration platform role into more of a continuum, I guess, kind of in that space.
Yeah, and I think, look, if you are perhaps a more traditional payment processor, PSP, been around a while, then or you've grown by acquisition, which a number have, there is a bit of spaghetti in the background there that you perhaps don't want to share with your merchant. And I think adding an orchestration layer on the front, and as I said, we're happy to white label, that essentially takes that complexity away from a merchant, will help you compete with people that are a bit simpler.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that enables those perhaps older, more established players with their spaghetti to offer a better service to their end merchants. So they might forego a little bit of acquiring revenue potentially, but at the benefit of a better merchant experience.
I think that's one thing struck us earlier when we talked to merchants in the beginning, and we asked, how would you want to pay for a service like Gravy? And really, they said, no more payment tax. Like, please don't eat into our margins. We don't charge basis points. We don't charge a percentage of the transaction, and we don't even charge a transaction fee in most cases, because we view an orchestration as a platform, as a tool that sits in the middle. So our model looks much, again, like a cloud platform. We look much more like a GCP or an AWS and how we build customers than we do the traditional interchange model.
Mm-hmm. The points you're raising about these different stakeholder groups. We didn't mention regulators. Have you talked to any regulators, John? Directly or indirectly? Any points of view you can share there? I
think very much that, when we had sat down with some of the regulators and talked about what we do, the fact that we keep merchants' data separate for that merchant, it gives them some level of comfort. We're not adding another breachable layer in the middle that is handling the data. We keep our data very specific for that merchant, only accessible by them, not shared with other people, so that we can step up quickly. We also don't touch the money, so every single one of the merchants that works with Gravy has their own contracts with PSPs, acquirers, etc. So the actual money isn't flowing through us, and essentially are operating as a tool or a piece of software in the middle. So it keeps us away from the problems or issues the regulators are trying to avoid.
Right. So just strictly better infrastructure. Listening to you talk about all those stakeholders, though, made me think, and then reflecting on your earlier comment about the first thing people said was, why do we need this? We already have one, or, nobody needs this.
Well,
when you have something that slips into the overall system and more than one stakeholder sees value or benefit in it, that's sort of a testament to the whole concept having legs. I think that this is not a flash in the pan sort of orchestration was important in 2022 to 2025, and then it wasn't anymore. I think we're going to see this kind of sticking around.
Yeah, I feel like it's getting to a point where people don't question why it should exist. They understand it should exist, and it's more to a point of like, should I keep building this myself, or should I start bringing in a third party to help with the tools? And that's the same in software and evolution of internet software over the last few years. It's always been that. It's like build it in-house or use a third party tool. And it usually starts slow with building in-house, and eventually people realize it's more efficient to use a third party tool.
It's just not merchant empowerment. It's just general empowerment, really, is what it's coming to. But ironically, from roots in the merchant side of things, which is not normal. It feels a little bit like all singing, all dancing, though, too, to some folks. Is there anything that you should not rely on orchestration to do?
Maybe it's my own personal feeling, but I like to learn from their mistakes of the past. And I really don't think an orchestrator should handle the money. I think that a number of cases, of course, investors and others have come to us and said, why don't you, get an acquiring license? Why don't you start doing transaction processing? And my view of this is, if we did do that, then we're just going back to where we were before there was an orchestrator, right? And so I really don't think orchestrators should be handling money. I don't think they should be sitting in the middle. I personally don't think they should even be taking referral bonuses from PSPs, etc. I think an orchestrator should be independent, should be a tool that is usable by a merchant, and it really should be on the merchant side. So that's just my kind of fundamental beliefs on why this should exist and how you keep it growing and neutral, because otherwise we're going to lose the trust of merchants, and that ruins everything.
John, I'm curious to dig into that more, especially as, we talked earlier, a lot of PSPs and acquirers are starting to step into the orchestration space and doing a lot of orchestration activities. And you bring up an interesting point to paraphrase that once the orchestration platform has a vested interest, whether it's a referral bonus, whether it's their own acquiring, it is putting the thumb on the scale for optimizing your decision making. Do you think it's truly critical to, in order to be an orchestration platform, you must stay out of the flow of funds?
I think if you want to be a truly neutral orchestration platform on the side of merchants, I don't see how you could do it otherwise. I think that what we've seen over time is even with the growth of the PSP, sometimes the decisions are being made on behalf of the PSP or other stakeholders and not necessarily the merchant. And I think that's why we talk about empowering merchants, and I want us to stay in that space where we're empowering merchants, not, and not the other way around.
I like the way you put it when we were chatting before we did this recording here. You said, if you're building on interchange, you're headed for trouble. I thought that was very succinct and precise.
Interchange is going away, whether people like it or not, is going to go away over time. And I think there's a whole combination of different things happening, both from a regulation side, but also, open banking is still early and is growing, and more and more merchants are starting to talk about trying it and trying different ways of doing it. And ultimately that, and, potentially buy now, pay later and other things out there are starting to put pressure on the interchange model. And ultimately it becomes a commodity. And if it becomes a commodity, if you're a payments company, you need to be doing the stuff around interchange, not just purely interchange.
Right. What other predictions do you have about orchestration and where things are headed here?
Well, my ideal prediction is I think everyone will use orchestration at some stage in the next 3 or 4 years, whether it's us or someone else. I think you're not going to end up with one winner in the orchestration place. I think you're going to end up with, people like ourselves that specialize in larger merchants and platforms. You're going to end up with others who perhaps help earlier stage merchants, and you're going to end up with some vertical orchestrators. I think things like travel and perhaps online gambling, gaming, they will need particular orchestration models that doesn't make sense for the likes of us to go into, and it might make sense for other companies to concentrate on. So I think that orchestration will, in a few years' time, it will just be expected that you have an orchestration layer. You will also have a PSP, or have a processor, or have all the way down. But I think that's where we're going with orchestration. I think the other side of it is, what happens with delegated auth and what happens with the changes that are going here. I think fundamentally, in my view, are going to change a lot in payments. I think it's going to change the risk levels. It's going to change liability. Look at subscriptions, for example. If you look at what's going on with these at the moment, if you accidentally or sign up to Dog Toy of the Month or whatever, it's a massive pain in the ass to end your subscription and go through that whole process. But with some of this new stuff coming out, we'll just essentially be able to go into your online bank account and have a look and just go click, 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 click. Now, what does that do to the subscription model? Generally, it changes everything, because a lot of subscription companies have passive revenue. And
that's right.
That suddenly goes away. What happens to that? And then what happens to the I don't understand. I understand in the old days why an online transaction would cost more than an in-store transaction because of risk. But I would argue with delegated auth and it done properly with biometrics, online transactions are potentially even less risky than in-store payments. So why are we still paying that much more for an online payment? And that then changes the whole setup all the way through. If the liability shifts away from merchants, why do you need to be using anti-fraud companies for those types of transactions? They will always exist, but actually identity gets much more important. And as the payments evolve, as these things change, you're going to need an orchestration platform, because there's no way in hell a 5-person dev team you're going to keep up. It's just not going to happen.
That's right. That is very true. It's very true. I've seen a lot of teams that are far more than 5 devs, quite stressed trying to do something, especially at a global level, it's sort of the interesting thing about all of this is over the last 15 years, when you and I were starting out in 97 in different areas, but yes. And you look at how long it took back then for a company to go global, a merchant launching to go global. And now people are coming literally online global. And that is wonderful, for their customer acquisition and all of their go-to-market strategy and so forth. But from a payments perspective, with all this change and the different regulatory perspectives and paces in each country, that's where I think it really starts to go exponential in terms of level of effort.
Yeah,
to
and then
do this.
I've sent them out. I've spoken to so many merchants in the past who've tried to launch in Europe with just cards, and you're like, this isn't going to work. And then,
first of all, when you talk payments, you don't say Europe. You might say EU in some cases, but the proclivities of people do not necessarily follow a common.
It's not easy. The truth is, it's not.
That's right.
And there's not, groups like yourselves and others who are helping spread the message. But honestly, the amount of payment experts out there is quite limited. And especially if you're a company that, needs to expand quickly, it's like finding the right talent, the right skills, and people who actually know what's going on and can help you get that is really hard. And then you need a team to do that work. So, you can go out with a great strategy, but if you can't execute on it, how's that going to help you?
That's right. And, I have to ask about AI and all of this because there's so much business logic, if you will, or payments logic within an orchestration with the routing and the retry and the tokenization management and 3D secure, all the stuff you've been talking about. Where do you see AI fitting into this longer term?
Well, first thing is I was working with AI and anti-fraud on payments 15 years ago, right? That is not a new thing when it comes to anti-fraud and payments. It's been around for a while. I think when we talk to our clients about AI-based decision-making, what we get back is, I'm not quite ready to let an AI make decisions on behalf of me, but I would like to know what the AI would have done and why they would have done it. And I think so while we roll some of the AI out this year, we're doing a particular form of AI, which basically tells you how the AI gets to that decision and allows you as a merchant to tweak that left or right based on your preferences. And I think there's not enough. Every merchant's going to be individual. Every choice is going to be depending on where you're selling to, who you're selling to, what you're selling, how, etc. So we're building our AI very much on the point of this is the best route for best author rate. This is the best route for least cost. But you can tweak this and you can tune it based on how you want to behave to your customer. So exactly what we talked about before. An AI could make some really nasty decisions based on logic that's not great for a consumer. And some merchants will care more about customer experience and some will care more about risk or fraud or cost. So having an AI that fits into what you want to do and how your business likes to run itself is going to take time, and it's going to have to be very customizable, and it's going to have to interact with the merchants, not just with the payment systems.
Mm-hmm. John, I just want to pull a thread on something interesting you said to me, that if we're thinking about, traditional machine learning, which is where a lot of risk AI started, hearing a merchant say, well, I want to make the decision, but then I want to know what AI would have decided. Are we essentially training ourselves on AI instead of the other way around?
It's always going to be the case with AI, right? I think most of the fear around AI is a little bit about loss of control. And we're dealing with money here, and people really care about their money. So there's always there's a reason we have all the regulations and everything around it. It's important to have some control on it. And so I think it's going to be slowly when it comes to payments. Someone's not going to release a magical AI that makes everything work amazingly tomorrow, because just one size doesn't fit.
Yeah, I think that resonates with what we hear when we're talking to merchants and retailers. The kind of giving up of control definitely doesn't feel comfortable to some or many. And so I think as we're thinking about kind of AI, whether it's in a sort of routing logic context or kind of elsewhere, that adoption curve is going to be quite lengthy for the AI-driven decisioning to take the kind of primary route rather than the sort of secondary or advisory route.
Yeah. I think the other thing that where we will start to see AI is more in sort of the payment consulting world, as it were. So being able to ask, there's a lot of data out there, but very few merchants doing a lot with that data because it's very hard to consolidate it all. So having a way to ask the right questions could be a part where I think you'll start to see AI coming more and more, so that the ability to say, well, why are my Visa cards getting a lower auth rate in Brazil than they are in Argentina? I think an AI could format that quite nicely and provide strict data through. So I think you'll start to see AI in that case. It's more sort of large language models asking questions rather than trailing through loads and loads and loads of different reports.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been an absolutely delightful conversation. So, John, thank you so much for joining us.